We begin with our top story right now with latest updates coming in from the Israel-Hamas War. Well, unrelenting Israeli bombardment rocked Gaza on Monday, and this comes in the backdrop of the Israeli army spokesperson saying that the war on Hamas leaders in Gaza would continue well into 2024 too. Now, in the latest series of attacks, Israel has released a video showing how its army destroyed Hezbollah infrastructure, and the IDF has claimed that the strikes were in response to the attacks from Lebanon towards the area in northern Israel. Now, on the other hand, Israel has started to withdraw some force from Gaza towards a shifting focus to more targeted operations against Hamas. And moreover, the Israeli Defense Forces are partially returning reservists to civilian life. Now, an IDF spokesperson said that 2 reservist brigades would be released this week.
In accordance with the recommendations given by the IDF and the defense establishment, we will soon be able to return communities home in areas within a range of 4 to 7 kilometers north of the Gaza Strip. The first group of 7 communities has already decided, and they have received the message. Kibbutz Dorot, where we are right now, is one of them.
Another official said that the military is now entering the 3rd phase of the operation. Tanks and troops have largely taken control of the Gaza Strip, and even though Palestinian gunmen are still ambushing people from underground tunnels and bunkers. Meanwhile, as Israel bombarded the Gaza Strip on Monday, Gaza's health ministry said that the attacks had killed 156 people, and drone footage shows destruction of a residential building in Al-Bala in central Gaza following the airstrike. Now, the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, or PRCS, also released a video post the attacks, and the video showed the organization's rescuers gathering 6 dead and 2 injured women from the Maghazi camp in central Gaza. The aid organization has also set up a new tent camp to expand aid operations. And as per the reports, the camp can accommodate 300 families of PRCS staff, which will later expand to 1,000 tents that will shelter other displaced civilians. Now, the impact of the war in Gaza extends beyond human life. Several animals have also fallen prey to the deadly war. Animals at a zoo in Gaza's southern city of Rafah are dying of hunger. And many displaced Palestinians are now taking shelter in a zoo where 4 monkeys have already died of starvation. And the 5th one is also sick as people scramble to help the exhausted animal drink water and eat food. All this comes amid a major ongoing judicial crackdown in Israel. And Israel's top court ruled Monday against a key component of the government's controversial legal overhaul. And the overhaul challenged the powers of the judiciary and sparked mass protests. And for more on this, we are now being joined by our correspondent Jody Cohen from Tel Aviv. Jody, now you're at Hostages Square in Tel Aviv, I believe, which is a gathering point for relatives of the hostages. What can you tell us about the mood there, and also about the latest reports which are on talks of another potential hostage release deal?
Hi, Aditi. So as the hostages who were released as part of the last hostage release deal are starting, some of them, to talk about their experiences, it's obviously very important to hear those testimonies, but very harrowing for the relatives of the roughly 130 people still being held hostage in Gaza. Now, for example, in the latest, we heard testimony from Mia Shachem, who compared her time as a hostage to the Holocaust. And despite Hamas denials, the New York Times has published their investigation into Hamas sex crimes, including rape, torture and dismembering women and men. Now, amongst those remaining hostages is Kfir Bibas, who was 9 months old when he was taken into Gaza. He'll be approaching his 1st birthday in January, we're hearing, and some of the released hostages and their relatives believe that time is simply running out for those hostages. Meanwhile, we've heard a report that an Israeli delegation has been in Cairo to discuss a potential another hostage release deal. Now, this is separate to Egypt's proposal to end the war, which would involve a permanent ceasefire, the release of all of the hostages, and Gaza being ruled by a Palestinian government of experts. And Egypt is awaiting Hamas and Islamic Jihad's response on that. They had earlier rejected that proposal. So it remains to be seen what comes out of that proposal, as well as this latest potential hostage release deal that we're hearing about that could involve a partial release of some of the hostages in exchange for a temporary pause in the fighting. But there are other reports that suggest that Hamas and Israel are very far apart in their positions, so nothing is expected soon.
And Jody, I mean, as you mentioned also briefly, the High Court has struck down the government's judicial reform legislation on the reasonableness clause. And now this legislation was one of the factors that led to the mass protests, as we saw in Israel in 2023. Now, what has been the reaction of the government? And can we expect this issue to be renewed despite that the war is going right now?
Right, so as you said, the High Court has struck down this legislation, which this judicial reform proposals were behind the protests that we saw over the past year. Very controversial, very polarising in Israel, with many people firmly in support of judicial reform and many people firmly against. Now, this High Court move is seen as controversial because the legislation was passed as a basic law, and the Prime Minister's office has slammed the court for the timing of their ruling, coming, of course, during this war that's taking place. Now, one of the justices on the panel, Justice Mintz, he said that he believes the court has no authority to rule on a basic law, and that the court also has other tools to ensure a balance of power between the government and judiciary. Justice Minister Levin says that he believes it's now impossible to rule on any legislation. It's impossible to legislate on anything following this ruling, because he believes then the court has to agree to everything, and says that this ruling is unprecedented in the democratic world. Now, theoretically, the government could re-legislate, but it's unlikely. Commentators are suggesting it's unlikely that they're going to do that during this war. And we know that War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz has said that he believes the government should seek a consensus on this issue after the war is over.
Thanks, Jody, for joining in and giving us those updates. Thank you.